Hello, I'm Frank Souza, and all this week on Homework Hotline, we're celebrating our 9th anniversary. We've got some special tapes, including fresh 1992 bloopers and other surprises, so stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to Homework Hotline. I'm Wilfred Smith. Today's the last day of our week-long 9th anniversary celebration. We've got a terrific show planned for today. But before we get started, let's go to one of our English teachers, Angela Hewlett-Block, at the phones and see what kinds of calls are coming in. Angela.
Thanks, Wilfred. I'm Angela Hewlett-Block. Just listen to those phones. We still have some lines open. If you have an English question, call and ask for me. And I'd need a caller today, so please call in. I'd like to do your question on the air. English comes on at 5 o'clock, so you have 30 minutes to call and talk to me. Stay tuned now for 30 minutes of math with Wilfred and Frank.
Thanks, Angela. Today we're concluding our 9th anniversary week celebration. And we're all very proud of our accomplishments in the last 9 years. Of course, there are those days when things just don't quite go as planned. And yes, we have our bloopers reel today. These bloopers and goofs are all from our 9th season. So, John, roll those tapes. And
I'd like to start off with a problem where we're solving for x. And before I get started, I'd like to introduce to millions of people a person by the name of Yesenia. Yesenia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, I can just barely hear you, so speak right into the phone and speak right up, all right?
Okay.
Ah, much better, much better. Now, can you see this problem on your own television screen?
Yes, and you wrote it wrong.
Oh, you tell me, correct it for me then.
Instead of an 8, it's an A.
Oh, it's an A, letter A. All right, well, we'll get rid of that and we'll put an A. All right.
Now, before we start with English, I want to take just a second and point out something in the math segment that Robert did. Now, it looks a little strange to have math up here for an English teacher, but if you'll notice, on his last problem he did, and he was kind of rushed for time here, and we squared a -3. And at home, you were probably saying, well, when we multiply -3 times -3, it should be a positive number. Therefore, this 9 should be a positive 9. So Robert said, oops, now you have your correction.
If you have any questions about anything that you're studying, be sure you can study by calling up the LA teachers, the 1-800-LA study, which is 527-8839, 1-800, or just dial 1-800-LA study. And everything will be made clear by our wonderful teachers here. So, well, I'm lost here. Characterization. Help me out here. Bye.
remember, you can call in your questions simply by calling 1-800-527-8839 or just simply dial 1-800-LA-STUDY. Remember, the call is free, the help is free. So what are you waiting for? And now here's Frank.
Thank you, Wilfred. Okay, today I'm going to do some problems involving the distributive property. I'm going to do a problem involving squares and integers, and I have a caller that's going to help me with the distributive property. Jacob, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, Jacob, did I write your problems correctly up here? Do you see your problem here?
Yeah.
Okay, but before we get started, you want to tell us what grade you're in and what school you go to?
Yeah. I'm in 7th grade and I go to Mount Gleason Junior High.
Okay.
Or middle school.
Okay, great. They're changing a lot of the junior highs to middle schools now,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Now, before we do the problem, I just want to quickly talk about what the distributive property is. The distributive property is the distributive property of multiplication with regard to addition, meaning that instead of multiplying something, we can add it first or vice versa, and it means the same thing. And I'm going to illustrate it here with you with your help. We're going to first change a multiplication problem into just an addition problem, and then we're going to go backwards and change a multiplication problem, an addition problem into a multiplication problem. Are you ready to start?
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the first problem up here. Okay, can you see that on your screen?
Yeah.
Okay, now the problem says -5 times this quantity, what's here in the parentheses, which is 2 3/5 plus x. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, now what that means is that we have to multiply the -5 times each of these parts in the parentheses. And to do that, what do we need to do first, Jacob?
Well, first you need to change the 5 to an improper fraction, and you have to change the 2 3/5 to an improper fraction.
Very good. What Jacob is saying is that this is just a regular integer number here, and we want to write that as an improper fraction because we have to change this one to an improper fraction as well, and that'll help us to multiply it better if we see that they're both fractions. Okay, now I'm going to rewrite the problem down here a little bit differently. Now, let's work with the 2 3/5. Can you change that into an improper fraction for me?
Yeah.
What do you get?
13 fifths.
That's correct. And how did you get 13? What did you do?
Well, I multiplied 2 times 5,
That's right, the whole number times the denominator, and
and
then
I
what?
add the numerator.
Very good. So multiply this number times the denominator and add the numerator. 2 times 5 is 10 plus 3 is 13. So it was 13 over what again?
Fifth. 5.
Fifth. 13 fifths or 13 over 5. Notice that we kept the same denominator. Okay, do we need to do anything with the x right now?
No.
No, we'll just leave it alone for now. What we did is just rewrote the problem so it's a little bit easier to work with. Okay, the -5 here, I'm just going to write it here, okay?
Okay.
All right, just -5. Now, what do we do to work out the problem?
Well, we multiply 5 times the -5 times the 13 fifths.
Very good. We're going to multiply the -5 times this part, and then we'll multiply it times that part, right?
Right.
Okay. Can you tell me what we get, or what happens when we multiply -5 times 13 fifths?
Well, we cancel the -5 and the 5.
Very good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little 1 under here so we can visualize it a little bit better. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And I think you said that at the beginning, that we should change the -5 into an improper fraction, right?
Right.
Okay. The only reason we do that is just so we can visualize it better. If we're multiplying with two fractions, it's easier to see what's going to happen. And Jacob, what is going to happen here?
Well, we're going to cross cancel and cancel the 2 5s.
Very good. This 5 cancels with this 5, and what do I get?
Then you get 13.
That's right.
13.
Because 1 times 13 is 13, and you already said it. We multiplied a negative number times a positive number, and it comes out what again? Negative, right?
Yeah.
You said it. I just
13.
wanted you to repeat it. You're doing just fine. You're doing great. Okay, but now we still have to multiply the 5, or -5, times the x over here. And Jacob, what happens when we multiply -5 times x?
You get 5x.
5x, that's correct. But once again, we multiplied a negative times a positive, so what do we get?
We get -5x.
Very good. And I'm going to write the problem two different ways. We can say -5x like that, so we can say -13 minus 5x, or another way to write it would just be -13, and I put the -5x like this, and what would I put in the middle here?
Plus.
Plus. So this means the same thing. Subtracting 5x is the same as adding -5x. So either answer would be acceptable depending on how you're learning to do it in class and how your teacher is expecting you to learn it right now. Okay, Jacob, did you understand how we went through all that?
Yeah.
Okay, what we did is we changed a multiplication problem because this was saying -5 times all of this, and we changed it so we got an addition problem, or another way to look at it is as a subtraction problem. But remember, adding some number adding a negative is the same as subtracting the number, so it means the same thing. Okay, now we're going to do a different problem. And what we're going to do is we're going to go backwards. We're going to do the distributive property backwards. Because right now we have an addition problem, right? Do you see this problem on your screen, Jacob?
Yeah.
Okay, we have an addition problem. And what we're going to do is we're going to undo it so that it looks like a multiplication problem. And it'll end up looking like our original problem up there. Okay, can you see this clearly on your screen?
Yeah.
Okay, now what do you notice that's in both of these parts of the problem?
twos and ones. One
Okay,
half.
very good. 1/2, twos and ones. Okay, since the problem's going to look like, if we can see the whole screen up here, I'd like to show the original problem here. You'll notice that we had a number outside the parentheses and 2 parts inside the parentheses, right?
Right.
Okay, when we do it now, we're going to have parentheses, and basically we're doing that problem backwards, okay? Now, you told me what's in both of these parts?
1/2.
1/2. So what I'm going to do is put 1/2 out here, okay? Do you want to put just 1/2, or do you want to bring the negative sign out as well? What would you like to do? We can do it either way. Do you want to put the negative out here?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. We'll put negative 1/2, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm taking each of these parts and I'm taking out negative 1/2. I'm factoring it out. I'm undoing this addition problem so that it's basically doing the distributive property backwards, okay? So if I factor out negative 1/2, Jacob, what's left here?
And there's just x plus 1/2.
That's correct. X is left, and we factored out 1/2 from there, so I need something here as a placeholder. What will be there as a placeholder? Okay, actually it's not 1/2. If I factor out the 1/2, I need something there as a placeholder, okay? Now, look at it carefully here. And if I factor out 1/2, I need something there. There's nothing left there, but I need a placeholder. Do you know what that would be as a placeholder?
Yeah, 0.
Not 0. 0 would be nothing, but you're close. What else can we put there as a placeholder? Let me put it to you this way. 1/2 is the same as 1/2 times 1, right? That's still 1/2, isn't it?
Right.
Okay, so if I take out the 1/2, what's left there?
Just 1/2 left.
How about this number? 1.
1. Yeah.
Okay, so I need a 1 here as a placeholder. Okay, if we had put 0, let me just look at this. If we had put 0, what's 1/2 times 0?
0.
0, so that wouldn't work. But 1/2 times 1 is the same as 1/2, right? 1/2 times 1 is still 1/2. So
Yeah.
when we factor out the 1/2, that's why there's 1 left and not 0. Okay, and one other thing, since we factored out a negative sign, in order to get this plus here, what would I multiply negative by to get a plus there, Jacob?
You would multiply it by positive.
Negative. Very
negative.
good, and negative, so x minus 1, okay? Now let's do the problem backwards to make sure it works out. If we were to distribute like we did in the first problem, this is going to be our answer. We undid this problem, but let's do it backwards and see if we get the same answer. Jacob, if I multiply negative 1/2 times x, what will I get?
1/2 x.
1/2 x, and what?
Negative.
Negative, okay. And now, can you tell me if I multiply negative 1/2 times negative 1, what will that give me? What's
1/2, it would give you...
You said it, 1/2.
1/2.
And then one other thing, if I multiply negative times negative, I get?
Negative.
Multiplying two.
No, positive.
Very good, positive. And notice that this problem and this one are the same thing. That's what we started with. Let me get rid of that 1 now. I just put it there to show you what it was. Is this the same as this?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it worked. When we undid the distributive property, it did work, and that's what we got. Okay, Jacob, thank you very much for doing these 2 problems with me. Can we have a round of applause for Jacob? Okay, thanks a lot, Jacob.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, I'm going to do another problem here that involves some squares. This one was called in by Carol, who's an 8th grader. And let me go ahead and read the problem. It says the side of one square is 7 inches longer than the side of a second square. The difference in area of the 2 squares is 231 inches squared. Find the length of the side of each square. Okay, I drew 2 squares here. And the first part of the sentence tells us that the side of one square is 7 inches longer than the side of the other. So we're going to use some variables here. And I'm going to use x. I'm going to represent this smaller square as having side x. And we all know that in a square, all the sides are the same. So it's x all the way around, but I won't write it. And since it says that the bigger square has sides 7 inches longer, or 7 inches more, I'm going to write it as this number x plus 7, because that means 7 more, x plus 7. Then it goes on to say that the difference in the area of the 2 squares is 231 inches squared. Okay, to find the area of a square or a rectangle, we're going to multiply basically length times width, but in the square the sides are the same, so we're going to multiply one side times the other. So what I would do is multiply x plus 7 times, on this side it's also going to be x plus 7. So we're multiplying 2 binomials together here. And then this is a key word here where it says the difference. Well, when it refers to the difference, that means subtraction. So I'm going to subtract the area of the big square minus the area of the small square. Again, we're going to multiply one side times the other, so it'll be x times x. And I'll work it out in a minute, and we're going to get x squared. And that difference, when we subtract them, is going to be, and they tell us in the problem, 231. And I'll leave the units off. I'll put them in at the end. Okay, when we multiply out a binomial, we multiply the first terms, x times x, which gives me x squared. Then we multiply our outside terms. X times 7 is 7x, but that's going to add with these two terms, the inside terms multiplied together, which is another 7x for a total of 14x. And then finally, we're going to multiply 7 times 7, which is 49. What I just did is I did the distributive property, which is what I worked out with Jacob a few minutes ago, but I took each of the parts in this parentheses, and I multiplied it times each of the parts in the other parentheses. So x times each of these parts, and the 7 times each of these parts. Okay, minus, now I work this out, x times x is x squared, equals 231. Okay, now we want to combine like terms. This x squared and this x squared, I have a positive x squared and a negative x squared, and they subtract and give us 0, so I'll just cross those out. They're 0. They cancel each other out. So I'm left with 14x plus the 49 equals 231, and now it just becomes a basic equation to solve. I subtract 49 on both sides of the equal sign. This cancels, gives me 0, so I'm left with 14x equals, and when I subtract that, I get 182. And now I divide by the coefficient here, 14, and when I divide by 14, I get that x equals 13. Okay, so x is 13. That's the side of, and let me double check that to make sure I have that right. Yes, x is 13. That's the side of this square, 13 inches. I'm putting the units back in now. So that's 13 inches. And the other square was 7 inches more, so going back up here, 13 is x, so 13 plus 7 is 20 inches. So these are the two lengths, or the sides, of the two triangles. The small triangle was 13 inches in length on the side, and the large triangle was 20 inches in length on the side. And I am out of time. I want to thank Jacob for doing those two problems with me. Thank you for being here. There is 15 more minutes of math with Wilfred.
Thank you, Frank. My first question is from Crystal, who's an 8th grade student at Bancroft Junior High School. And Crystal wants to simplify algebraic fractions. Let's look at Crystal's problem. It reads, a plus 2 divided by a squared plus 5a plus 6 minus 2 plus a divided by 4 minus a squared plus 2 minus a divided by a squared plus a minus 6. Just like we do in adding and subtracting regular fractions, we need to find common denominators. The same is true for algebraic fractions. But let's look at the problem just again. All right, notice the second fraction. We have 4 minus a squared, whereas in all the other fractions, the first term was the quadratic term, a squared, a squared. We could change these around by taking the opposite of 4 minus a. The opposite of 4 minus a, if we were to do that, the opposite of 4 minus a squared would be a squared minus 4. And so this minus sign would then get multiplied by the original negative sign to produce a positive sign. And so we're going to rewrite our expression, and it becomes a plus 2 divided by a squared plus 5a plus 6. And then now this changes to a plus sign, plus, and while we're at it, we're going to use the commutative axiom for addition to rewrite 2 plus a as a plus 2. So this is a plus 2. And the denominator is now a squared minus 4. Again, we are allowed to switch it around if we take the opposite. And so negative times negative is positive. Now, on this side, we have 2 minus a. And again, we like to write our polynomials in decreasing order of magnitude on the powers. So we would like to write the a first. Now, again, if we look at 2 minus a, and we took the opposite of that, then we would get a minus 2. Now, remember, we started out with a positive sign. So this sign changes to a negative. And so as we go, we're going to write minus a minus 2 over a squared plus a minus 6. All right, so this expression is equivalent to the original expression. Now, let's factor. We're going to factor the numerators and the denominators as best we can. As we look at the first numerator, it's already simplified, but we can factor the denominator. So let's do that. The numerator remains as a plus 2. Now we're factoring a squared plus 5a plus 6. All right, we look at the 6. We need factors of 6. What comes to mind? 3 and 2. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 plus 2 is 5. So we have found the factors that we need. We can factor the polynomial into a plus 3 times a plus 2. All right, now we come to the second fraction. Remember we had a plus sign. The numerator is still a plus 2, but the denominator is the difference of squares. This is a squared, and the 4 is 2 squared. And we know how to factor the difference of squares. We simply write the square roots. The square root of 4 is 2. The square root of a squared is a. And we simply put a difference and a sum. So in one set of parentheses, we get a minus sign. In the other set of parentheses, we get a plus sign. And that is factoring the difference of squares. Now to the last fraction. Remember the minus sign. It is now a minus 2. But again, we can factor the denominator. Remember that 6? Last time we did 3 and 2. But now we have a negative 6. So one of the factors must be negative. And as we look at it, we have a 3 and a 2 would be a positive 6. But we need a negative 6. So 3 times negative 2 would be negative 6. And if you see, positive 3 plus negative 2 would be a positive 1, which is the coefficient on the linear term. And that's what we use. So we have found the factors. The factors are a plus 3 times a minus 2. And so now we're factored completely. Of course, the next step would be to find the common denominator. But before we do so, let's look at what we see. Look at the first fraction. The numerator has a plus 2. The denominator has a factor of a plus 2. So why don't we simplify by reducing so we can cancel a plus 2 into a plus 2 goes once. So that is a simpler fraction. And the second fraction, again, are there any common factors? Well, again, a plus 2 is a single quantity. So we can divide a plus 2 into itself. A plus 2 into itself goes once. And so that simplifies. And as we look at the last fraction. We have a minus 2. We have a minus 2. We can cancel again. Okay, and now let's rewrite what we have got. Right now we get 1 over a plus 3 plus 1 over a minus 2 minus 1 over a plus 3. Simple fractions. Now let's look once more. Look at this first fraction. 1 over a plus 3. It is the same as the last fraction, except this is the opposite of that. This is the minus sign. So if you took one number, subtracted the same number, like Frank just said, they cancel out to 0. So this minus that is 0. And so your simple answer becomes 1 over a minus 2. And this is your final answer. As simple as that. Now, of course, what most students would do would be to find the common denominator immediately, and you'd get some complicated looking expression, but you would still end up at the same answer, 1 over a minus 2. All right, my next question comes from an 8th grade student, and Hippolito is a student at Bravo Medical Magnet. And he wanted to solve this particular question. It is a word problem. It says, what is the 100th digit in the decimal equivalent of 2 7s? Seems like it's almost impossible to figure, because if we try to do that on our calculator, we wouldn't have enough digits. So what can we do? Let's look at 2 sevens. This is the fraction that we're concerned about, and we want to write the decimal equivalent of 2 sevens. The easiest way to convert from a fraction to a decimal is to simply do a long division problem. So we're going to divide 7 into 2. Now remember, 2 means 2.000, as many zeros as you feel like, added to the right. And so if we divide 7 into 2, won't go, so that's 0. There goes our decimal point. Now, let's divide 7 into 20. 7 into 20 goes twice. 2 times 7 is 14. The difference is 6. If we bring down the next 0, 7 into 60 goes 8 times. 8 times 7 is 56. The remainder is 4. Bring down our 0 once again. 7 into 40 goes 5 times. 5 times 7 is 35. Remainder is 5. Here goes another 0. 7 into 50, of course, goes 7 times. 7 times 7 being 49. Difference is 1. And it keeps going. Bring down the next 0. 7 into 10 goes once. 1 times 7 is 7. The difference is 3. Bring down our 0. 7 into 30 goes 4 times. And at this point, you're wondering, when is he ever going to stop? Let's see. 4 times 7 is 28. The difference is 2. Now remember, we started out with a 2, and so you can see if we added a 0, 7 into 20 would go 2 times, which would give you 14. You'd get a 6, and all these partial products would repeat. So the number would be 2, 8, 5, 7, 1, 4, 2, 8, and so on. And so the digits that repeat are 2, 8, 5, 7, 1, 4. Now, how does that help us? Well, first of all, we can count the number of digits that repeat. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 digits that repeat. Now, we want the 100th digit. So let's look at that. If we divided 100 by 6, 6 into 10 goes once. 6 into 40 goes 6 times. The remainder would be 4. So if we were to write this out as many times as possible, we would get 16 groups of 2, 8, 5, 7, 1, 4, and then there would be 4 additional digits before we got to that 100th digit. What would that 4th digit be? It would be 2, 8, 5, 7. And therefore, the solution to our problem is, of course, a 7. The 7 is the 100th digit in the decimal representation of 2, 7. Okay, and that's from Hippolyte, an 8th grade student. I see we have not much time, but my next problem comes from Manuel, who's a 7th grader at Gage Junior High School. He has a simple percent problem. So let's look at Manuel's problem. It says 70% of what number is 35? Now, Manuel, remember this proportion. Is divided by of equals percent over 100. Now, in this problem, the number is 35. And it says of what number we don't know, so let's give it a name, x. The percent is 70, and it's always 100 in the denominator. If we simplify, we divide by 10, and what can we do? We can divide horizontally. So 7 goes into 35 5 times, and finally we cross multiply. X times 1 is x, 5 times 10 is 50, so x is equal to 50. Do a quick check. What is 70% of 50? 35 in fact. And so we're done. Now my time is up, but please don't go away, because coming up next is 30 minutes of English plus a surprise. Stay tuned.
Hi, welcome to English on Homework Hotline. This is the end of our anniversary week. Happy anniversary.
Same to you, Angela.
And I'm Angela Hewlett-Block, and this is Deborah Gaines-Matthews. What are you going to do today?
Today I'm going to be helping Sylviana to use the writing process to write a 5-paragraph essay. And I'll also be helping David. David's a 5th grade student, and he wants to know, is it correct to begin a sentence with the word because? Oh. And if I have time, I'm also going to deal with some grammar kinds of things to help students with their writing. What are you going to do today, Angela?
I'm going to pick up where I left off on Tuesday and finish talking about writing a description. I'll review a little bit of what I talked about, finish that. And then if I have time, I have a very nice sonnet by William Wordsworth I'd like to do. So I'll get started right here, and we can start talking about writing description. I want to do a little bit of a review from where I left off on Tuesday. If we can take a look at the overhead here. Initially, I suggested some pre-writing strategies in that you should begin by trying to remember sights, sounds, smiles, tastes, textures. Go back over whatever it is you're trying to describe, whether it's a scene from a movie, whether it's an event that you personally experienced. These are the items that are important and that will help recreate that picture, which is what writing description is all about. Use a diagram like this, and this may be helpful using a diagram. Draw the circles, and you see which different items would fit in the circles, and get a picture. Start that picture for yourself of listing the sights, list the smells, the textures, tastes, and sounds, and so forth. And not only the time of situation, but also any other particulars about the situation that might be important. Also, in writing description, it is important to maintain what main impression do you want the details to create. So you have to be sure to answer these questions for yourself. Be very, very careful of adding too many details. Many students, when we are asked to write description or descriptive essays or paragraphs, oftentimes add a little too much. Don't add anything that will interfere with the main impression. Be sure that you understand exactly how you want your reader to feel, what emotion you want to cause them to experience at that time. And then lastly, arrange the remaining details in an order your reader can follow. Something we call spatial order, where you want to follow a certain pattern. Maybe if you're describing a person, you might start from the curly hair on the top of the head to their flamboyant tie to their fancy shoes. But in a manner that is easy for the reader to follow. If it's a room that you're describing, you may want to start at one end and move around the entire room. Let's move on to writing the first draft. Okay. First of all, be sure that you take notes when you're preparing to write. Jot down ideas that pop into your head, and that's why I have this here. Use your notes. You're probably wondering where these notes came from. You have to get something down, maybe an outline form to get you started. One way to begin is to write a sentence that clearly states the main impression. Now, I'm going to move up here a little bit and show how Frederick Douglass in this excerpt did exactly that in the first sentence of this excerpt. I then presented an appearance enough to affect any but a heart of iron. Okay, and notice that we are clear here that that whatever he is going to continue to talk about is going to be quite severe, quite emotional maybe, and it couldn't affect anyone else, or the only person that might not be affected would be one with a heart of iron. Let's move up. Okay. When you evaluate and revise, many students forget to do revision of their essays. Vary your sentences so they don't all begin the same way, and we'll notice that in the Frederick Douglass example. Use connecting expressions such as beside, alongside, in the middle, and so on to help your ideas flow smoothly. Now let's read the entire selection here. Okay. I then presented an appearance enough to affect any but the heart of iron. From the crown of my head to my feet, I was covered with blood. My hair was all clotted with dust and blood. My shirt was stiff with blood. My legs and feet were torn in sundry places with briars and thorns, and were also covered with blood. I suppose I look like a man who had escaped a den of wild beasts and barely escaped them. Okay, there's no question here about the impression that Frederick Douglass was trying to recreate for us. And I have underlined here the words blood. He reemphasizes that, okay, to make sure that we don't miss his point. The clots of blood he mentions, okay, wild beasts, okay, and it was not wild beasts that he had escaped. Incidentally, he had escaped from other men. Now let's move on here so that we can hopefully get through all of this. I added here a checklist that might be helpful for you when you are editing your paper. Yes, you must go back and revise and edit. Does every sentence support the main impression? There doesn't seem to be anything unnecessary in that brief excerpt by Frederick Douglass. Have you included enough details to develop your main impression? Be sure that there is sufficient enough information there to make it complete. Have you arranged the details in a clear and logical order? Let me bring this back down and we can take a look at the Frederick Douglass excerpt and see if he does that. He starts where? From the crown of my head, I was covered with blood, my hair. Notice he works down to the shirt, legs and feet, and so forth. Okay, so he does do it in an orderly fashion so that it is easy to follow and easy to get that picture. Let's move on. Have you used transitional expressions to connect ideas? Okay, make sure that you use those so that it is fluid. Have you used precise words? One thing you need to remember when these authors are writing these selections, they take a great deal of time in choosing those precise, not only precise but vivid, like this red pen, and concise. Okay? And they try not to overdo it and make sure they use just enough words to get the job done. Now let's look at this and use a checklist to proofread. Another sheet here. We'll have to go out a little wider on this one. Okay, that's perfect. Great. All right, guidelines for evaluating a paper. First of all, the content or purpose. Again, just to reiterate, do the ideas and details support the main purpose? Your purpose, remember, to describe or to tell a story, to explain, or to persuade. Always consider your audience. This is important. Remember who you are directing the writing to. Your choice of words and your style or your syntax will help in fashioning your paper for an appropriate audience. Will the intended reader find the paper interesting or useful? Development, is there enough information or detail? Again, the organization, not only in the order, but having a beginning, middle, and end. Is it clear? And is it clearly developed, which is even better? Are similar ideas grouped together? Okay, remember we talked about the spatial ordering, the listing of the ideas. Is the order clear? Have you used transitions and connecting words? The style and tone. You may not feel as a young writer you have developed a style yet, but I would bet probably that you have. You have a manner of doing things that is specifically yours, and you probably have a way of saying things or writing things that is your style. And be careful that you're watching and making sure that you are consistent in your style and tone. Is the language serious enough or light enough for the writer's purpose? Sentence structure, is there enough variety in sentence length and structure? Remember, we don't want it to become boring and simplistic, so vary your sentences. Word choice, are words precise, and is there variety? So let's go on to take a look at another example. Okay. All right, this is by a contemporary African writer, Alauda Akiano, describes the horrors of the ship's hold in his passage from his autobiography. So let's read through this together and talk about what he did and how he included all of these aspects of description. The stench of the hold while we were on the coast was so intolerably loathsome that it was dangerous to remain there for any time, and some of us had been permitted to stay on the deck for the fresh air. But now that the whole ship's cargo were confined together, it became absolutely pestilential. The closeness of the place and the heat of the climate, added to the number in the ship, being so crowded that each had scarcely room to turn himself, almost suffocated us. This produced copious perspirations, so that the air soon became unfit for respiration. From a variety of loathsome smells, and brought on a sickness among the slaves, of which many died, thus falling victims to the improvident avarice, as I may call it, of their purchasers. Okay, this is quite a serious description of what it was like in the hold of the ship when the slaves were being transported to the Americas. First of all, the stench. It's a very strong word to deal with the smell, the stench of the hold, and he goes on to describe that. It's loathsome. So notice his vivid word choices. It was so loathsome that it was dangerous to remain there. If you can imagine being somewhere that has those types of conditions where it might be dangerous to your health. Some of us have been permitted to stay on the deck for fresh air. Okay? But now the whole ship's cargo were confined together. Okay? And we know that the numbers jammed together in these cargo ships was in instances in the hundreds. So there was little or no space for them. Pestilential. Okay, pestilence, rats, bugs and germs and so forth. The closeness of the place and the heat of the climate added to the number in the ship being so crowded that each had scarcely room to turn himself almost suffocated us. So if you can imagine being confined in such tight and loathsome quarters that almost to suffocation. Copious perspirations, okay, extreme perspiring. The air soon became unfit for respiration, so to the point where it was not even fit for them to breathe. Loathsome smells, again, he repeats that, brought on a sickness among the slaves. Okay? And maybe you can imagine a smell that you felt was so loathsome and so disgusting that moved you to illness, of which many died. Okay? And probably because of the unsanitary conditions caused many deaths, thus falling victims to the improvident avarice, as I may call it, of their purchasers. Okay? So unfortunately, the purchasers of these slaves did not make out well because many of them were lost in the shipment. It doesn't look like I'm going to have time for the sonnet, so I will wrap up here and we'll move on to Deborah for 15 more minutes of English. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. I should have a live call. Sylviana, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, what grade are you in?
I'm in 8th grade.
And what school do you attend?
32nd Street USC Magnet.
Okay, Sylviana, I've written your homework question on the board. And I know, before we get to the question, I know that it's based on a short story written by Pearl Buck called The Good Deed. Now, for everyone listening, I'm going to be helping Sylviana to go through the writing process, or to use the writing process to write her assignment. But before we do that, Sylviana, so that everyone will understand what we're doing, why don't you tell us a little bit about the story, The Good Deed? What is it about? And just kind of give us a synopsis so that those listening will have an idea of the story. What is it about?
Okay, the story is about...
in other words, give us the plot, okay? Tell us what it's about.
The story is about this old lady who comes to America. Her son brings her to America because she's being persecuted by somebody in her native country, China. Mm-hmm. And she comes here, but she's homesick for China. Mm-hmm. So she comes here and she's very lonely and she has nothing to do. So her daughter-in-law invites one of her friends over to talk to her.
Okay.
And she notices that her daughter-in-law's friend has no husband, and she wants to fix her up with somebody.
Okay.
So she looks out her window and she sees this man across the street who works in this china shop. Mm-hmm. and she goes over to the china shop under false pretenses and says she's going to go buy 2 bowls. And to make a long story short, she hooks them up.
Okay.
And they seem to like each other.
Okay, all right. And so the good deed is that she's able to do what?
She's able to fix them up. She's able to get them to get married.
Exactly. In other words, she's able to arrange this wedding or this marriage between the two. Okay, now I have your writing assignment, your homework assignment on the board, and I'll just read it. In her writing, Pearl Buck, the author, hoped to explain the East to the West. Now, what do you think this means here before we go on? The East to the West? What do you think in the question?
She's trying to explain to the West the cultures of the East.
Okay, exactly. And more specifically, she's trying to explain this Chinese culture or custom to those in the West, okay, particularly American readers. Okay, and then the assignment says, write a 5-paragraph essay, and I'll just underline it. Write a 5-paragraph essay wherein you discuss, and that's a very important word, discuss the customs presented in the story, The Good Deed. Now, in that story, the author uses a lot of techniques to cause the reader to understand some of the cultures or customs in China. What are some of those, Silviana? Now, before you tell me, for everyone listening, that is what we're about to do is the very first step in the writing process, which is pre-writing. And in pre-writing, what we're doing is we're generating ideas. The worst thing that you can do is to get an essay topic, such as the one that I've just read, and to take your pen to paper and write an essay and turn it into your teacher. If you follow the steps, then your final product, your final draft will be much more logical and much more organized. Okay, so what we're doing right now is we're pre-writing, we're generating ideas, and what I'm going to ask Silviana to do, or what I'm going to ask you to do, Silviana, is just to brainstorm. Let's list some of the customs that were spoken of in the story. Okay, what are some of them?
Okay, one would be arranged marriages.
Okay, exactly. She went about and she arranged the marriage. So in Chinese culture, one of the things, as you've said, would be arranged marriages. What else as I'm writing? What else?
Respect for elders.
Okay, yes. What in the story did the author let us know that in Chinese culture they have a they emphasize respecting elders? Is there anything that you remember?
Well, yeah, the grandmother had 4 grandchildren which were very disrespectful.
Okay.
They didn't listen to her all the time, and they played around and they didn't really listen to what she said.
Okay, exactly. And I believe it was Mr. Pan who said, or maybe it was old Mrs. Pan, the grandmother, that said that one of the very first rules or one of the very first things that children should learn would be respect for elders. And not only that, remember that Lily Yang, she also referred to old Mrs. Pan as, how does she refer to her?
Ancient One.
Ancient One, and we found out that that really wasn't an insult, but that was a way of complimenting her, respecting her, because we know that with age comes wisdom. Okay, what else? Any other things?
Servants are used by wealthy families.
Okay, servants were used by wealthy families. And what did they say in the story that had us to know that this was true?
Well, the wealthy families had 3 servants, one for the children, one for the wives, and one for the husband.
Okay. Okay, and what else? Anything else?
Children are taught in the home.
Okay. In addition to children taught in the home.
Women dress modestly.
And finally, what did you say?
Women dress modestly.
The women dress modestly. Okay, and tell me again, in the story, what was it in the story that let us know that the women dress modestly?
She said that the women, she was offended because her daughter-in-law gave her a magazine which had short clothes for the women, and she was offended that her daughter-in-law gave her such a magazine.
Okay.
Because in her country, they don't dress eccentric. They dress very plainly and.
Okay. Okay, so the very first thing for everyone watching, the very first thing we want to do is we want to just generate our ideas so that we'll have some of the ideas to use in the essay. Okay, now let's move on over here to step 2, and we're going to go over some of the essential parts. Okay, the next step has to do with writing an outline, or in other words, taking those ideas and organizing them or putting some structure to those ideas. Okay, now I have 5 Roman numerals. Now, your teacher has asked you to discuss the customs presented in the story. Now, are we going to discuss 5 customs here?
No, we're not. We're just going to discuss 3.
Okay, yes, we'll definitely just discuss 3, and this will be the body of our essay. Okay, what do you think paragraph 1 or this Roman numeral stands for?
Introduction.
Okay, exactly. It will be the introduction. And in the introduction, one of the things we want to do is we want to be sure that we name the story, we want to give the author, the title, and also our thesis statement, or the idea that we're going to carry throughout the essay. And then finally, we know that Roman numeral 5 is going to be the conclusion. And what is the function of the conclusion, Silviana? What is this?
It's basically a reiteration of the introduction.
Okay, exactly. It's a reiteration, or it just repeats what the introduction says using different words. Now let's talk about the body. We're going to select 3 of the most important customs that was discussed in the story. Okay, and what you want to do is you want to save the most important one for last. Okay, I save the best for last. In other words, have the one that is most emphasized. And which one is that? What you think?
I think the last one would be the women dress modestly.
The women, well?
Women dress modestly.
Okay, well, before we write that, that might be one that we write. But I would think that the most important one, I'm kind of going out of order.
Yes, the most important would be the arranged marriages.
Exactly, okay, I'm kind of going out of order. But number 4, let's say arranged marriages. We know that we're going to write a paragraph that has to do with arranged marriages. Okay, and we're writing that last because the whole story has to do with arranged marriages. Okay, and then you said about the women dressing modestly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, okay, why don't I just, to save time, I'll write dressing customs. Okay, and we'll just remember. Okay, and then one other custom that maybe perhaps you would use in the essay.
Respecting elders.
Okay, respecting elders. Okay, now, just to have an idea, now, when we do this, when you begin to do this over and over, for those of you listening, you will probably just internalize, or you can imagine in your mind that you know you're going to have an introduction, you know you're going to have a conclusion, and you're going to have a paragraph that about each one of the items that you're going to discuss. Okay. Now, down here underneath, I've written a sample introduction that may be used because, like I said, in the introduction, we want to mention the author's name. We also want to mention the title, and we also want to give a general idea, or the thesis, the main idea that you're going to carry throughout this the essay. And I'll just read it. Okay, it says, in the story entitled The Good Deed, Pearl Buck explains the East to the West. And notice I'm just taking the question actually, and I'm using it as a part of the introduction. And that's one way that you can you can begin when you're writing introductions for beginning writers. In the story entitled The Good Deed, Pearl Buck explains the East to the West. Buck's story reveals to the American reader a variety of Chinese customs, okay? Then after the introduction, notice your next paragraph, you're going to begin with the topic sentence, and you're going to, after the topic sentence, you're going to have supporting sentences. In other words, those sentences that will support what your topic sentence is. Now, Silviana, if we were going to write a topic sentence for this idea here as we're beginning to write the essay, respecting elders, what do you think you might say? How would you word the topic sentence? Do you have an idea?
Respecting elders is a major factor in Chinese culture.
Okay, exactly. Another thing, that might be an excellent topic sentence for this paragraph. And you know, for everyone watching, you're going to have a topic sentence for each of the body paragraphs, specifically for each of the body paragraphs. And all of the sentences in that paragraph are going to explain and support that topic sentence that has to do with women dressing modestly. Okay, so we would have a topic sentence for all of the paragraphs, followed by the supporting sentences, and you want to make sure that each one of the supporting sentences actually further develops that topic sentence, okay? Because if it doesn't, it's a sentence that we want to eliminate. And then finally, we've already said the conclusion. In the conclusion, we want to begin with a transition like thus or as a result, and then we want to repeat or say in different words what we have said in the introduction. Now, Silviana, I hope, okay, from the draft, you know we're going to need to go into revising to make our ideas clearer, and then also editing to look for mistakes in grammar, subject and verb agreement, punctuation, and things such as that. And then finally, we're going to have a final draft. So it's a process, and if we follow the process, and it becomes easier time and time again as we do it, then that final draft is going to be much more logical, and we will be able to see how it works together with all 5 of the parts. Okay, now Silviana, before you go, I don't have David on the line, but David had a very simple question, and maybe you can help me with it. Is that okay with you, Silviana? Okay, David's question had to do, is it okay to begin a sentence with because? What would you say, Silviana?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay, well, actually, let me say this. It is possible to begin a sentence with because. Let's take a look at this example. Because it rained. Is this a complete sentence?
No, it isn't.
No, it isn't. This is actually a fragment sentence, okay? It's a fragment because it's not complete. Okay, but we can begin a sentence with because if it is a complex sentence. And this is an example of a complex sentence. Because it rained, we stayed at home. We have this is called a subordinate clause, and this is called a main clause or an independent clause. So when we put the two together, we can begin a sentence with because. So the answer to David's question, with Silviana's help, is yes, you can begin a sentence with because. Thank you. I'm Deborah Gaines Matthews, and Silviana, thank you for calling, and call us anytime. I'm Deborah Gaines Matthews saying goodbye from everyone at Homework Hotline. Okay.
This is our anniversary show, a very special show. We have completed 9 years and we're in our 10th. And our show is Homework Hotline Live. It's live because it lives, because of all the students out there and because of the teachers here. And remember, we did it our way.